Hey everybody, Bobby Medina here with my very good friend, the great Paul Barron, and we are here with our another good friend of ours, fellow trumpet player, an actual physician, a doctor. He was an emergency physician and also for 15 years head of hyperbaric medicine over at Vancouver General Hospital. A fellow Canadian, Paul, and I know we have a lot of Canadians in the group. So we want to welcome Dr. Dave Harrison here, the inventor of the Wedge Mouthpiece. And I know a lot of you out there have been really interested in this mouthpiece, and we're gonna start to talk a little bit about it. So Paul, I'll let you throw out the first question.
Thanks. Hi, Dave. Thanks for being with us. So how was the wedge invented? How'd you come up with the idea?
Um, well, I always tell people it was an act of desperation. Um, I was playing in an orchestra, advanced community orchestra, a mix of amateurs and professional players. We're doing West Side Story at the end of a long Pops concert, so sort of a Broadway review. And I don't know if you ever played the first trumpet part to West Side Story, but it's fun, but it's not for the faint of heart. And I just knew that that last page was going to kill me. At the end of the night, that last page I was going to have what I needed to play that part. So I started messing around thinking, okay, what other mouthpieces do I have here that I can try? And I tried a bunch of them. None of them really provided what I needed. So I said, well, maybe I can come up with something different that works better than a conventional mouthpiece. And I actually had a Lynch asymmetric mouthpiece that I had used in the past, but I had very poor flexibility on it. I had great range and endurance. So I tried modifying that. It improved flexibility, but still wasn't doing it. So then I said, well, let me try these changes to another mouthpiece, started modifying a bunch of Warburton mouthpieces. And it was based on some ideas I had about anatomy and physiology, some of the stuff that Mark Van Cleve has written about, dental structure and a wedge shape on your teeth. And, urban legends about people that had dental structure changed and the effect it has on playing. Said, well, I'm not going to wedge my teeth like some people do. Maybe I can put a wedge on the mouthpiece. So went to my garage with a file and about, I don't know, 25, 30 mouthpieces and ruined every last one of them, just destroyed them. They're unplayable. But finally came up with something that actually, surprisingly, was a unconventional and counterintuitive shape that added range and endurance and comfort without compromising my sound. In fact, the bizarre thing was that I was getting a better sound out of a shallower mouthpiece than I was out of a deeper mouthpiece and still had better range and endurance. So that was the genesis of it. The idea came to me early April, and I had a working prototype by the ITG, which was probably end of May. So in that time between April and end of May, I patented it, made a bunch of prototypes, and by November we were into production. So it was a fairly 6 months basically, I guess, of R&D and a lot of beta testing, and it's a long story, but let's leave it there. That was basically an act of desperation, trying to avoid humiliation in a public forum.
Well, at least you didn't file your teeth down. We know a lot of people that have done that, and I've known a couple of people that have actually filed like half of a tooth off, and I've heard stories. They're not really urban legends. They're really people that have had dental appliances placed to give them a gap or other kind of weird things, and then they wind up not being able to play at all, at least for a period of time.
I have a very slight gap. So as an experiment, my brother-in-law is a dentist. I said, Michael, close that gap for me. So I sat in the chair. He filled the gap. I played my trumpet before and after, and I lost a third in range when the gap went away. I said, okay, take the gap away again. My range came back. And this is sitting in a dental chair in the course of 10 minutes. I lost a third and I gained it back because he closed the gap in my two teeth. And it's a small gap. It's maybe 5 thou. It's not a lot, but it was enough to make a difference. So it's, your teeth play a very big role in how you play the brass instrument. So it was just
They do, but a lot of people, even like Maynard when he was young and Doc when they were young, they had gaps in their teeth, and later on they had caps put over them, and they just retrained themselves to play as well. So it's not an end all.
no.
There's too many people that don't have a gap that play really well.
Oh, absolutely.
But I don't think it hurts. But I think you got to grow up like that. So then, what's kind of like the theory behind it?
Well, the shape of the rim does a few things. All right, can you see my screen?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, so this is my design program. So I use Rhino to design it. And if you look at the mouthpiece from the side, this is a ghosted view. So this is a mouthpiece viewed from the side. So this would be the top rim, bottom rim, and you can see that there's a slope here. It's called the lateral dip. So it's not flat, it slopes down in that direction. If you look at the mouthpiece, if we rotated it, this is it viewed from the end. And if we rotate it up into playing position, you can see that the rims slope off at the sides here and here. So what it does is when you bring it up in a playing position, these rims are narrow functionally, and these are wide because they slope away from your embouchure here. So it takes the pressure off at the corner. So basically it relieves pressure at the sides of your embouchure and transfers it to 6 and 12 o'clock. And that frees your corners to not be pinned down by the mouthpiece. Because our blood flow into the center part of our embouchure and out again comes from the labial arteries in, and then the lymphatics and venous drainage out to the sides. If you have a mouthpiece sitting over your embouchure at 3 and 9 o'clock, it's like stepping on a garden hose. So you have impaired flow going back and forth. With the wedge rim, you have less pressure at the sides at 3 o'clock and 9 o'clock. So you get better blood flow in and out, which reduces swelling and improves circulation in general. So that's the main thing. It's the shape of the rim, taking pressure off where you don't want to have pressure. And also the rim is oval, vertically oriented. So you have a shorter aperture from side to side, but you retain cup volume because you've got the cup volume change to be vertically as opposed to side. So you kind of get the advantage of a smaller mouthpiece in terms of not having to have this large aperture unsupported by the rim, but you gain the advantage of a larger diameter because it's bigger at top and bottom.
This seems to go against the grain of conventional thought. When I first heard about it, I thought this thing is going to totally shut you down when you play, because this is where you don't, at least for me, the way I play, this is exactly where I don't want the pressure building up. It's where I feel like, I get it the most, and I have to just stop and tell everybody that I have one. I actually have a couple of them, and they're really cool. There's different barrels on them, lightweight, heavyweight. But what's interesting about it, and like all mouthpieces, I'm just gonna give, say that the proviso is like with all mouthpieces, it's based on however your setup is and what works for you. So, you may find this doesn't work at all. You may find, if you're like me, I have found this to be everything that Dr. Dave here has said, which is very, very rare. We hear claims all the time, and we try stuff, and sometimes they work. Most of the times they don't, or they kind of work. But for me, I in an really honest thing, it really does work for me. And I think part of the reason for me is I tend to play higher up on my upper lip. And so I kind of feel like I'm always fighting my bottom lip pulling out. And this thing for me, being that it's oval, it just covers just a little bit more area, nothing major. But it seems to hold everything together. And boy, my upper range is stronger. My endurance is better. That's just my take on it, but I think it's something very interesting that you've come up with.
Part of it is the oval, and part of it is the fact that that rim is cupping over your teeth. So it's, it's shaped this way. If you put it up against your embouchure, it's like this. So it's holding your embouchure in place so it doesn't open. It keeps it allows you to use compression in a more closed aperture. It encourages that. But it doesn't work for everybody. I think I had a wedge to Paul in the pit at the Orpheum Theater in 2008 or something. It just didn't, now mind you, that was generation one, come a long way, but it didn't work. And I mean, our return rate is 10%. And if I go to a conference, which obviously not happening now, but when I was going to conferences, if 100 people walked up to the table in a day, 90 of them would be able to play better on a wedge I could find for them, and 10% just couldn't, no matter what I did. There was not a mouthpiece in my kit, and I might have 100 mouthpieces. Nothing that would work better for them. I say, well, you're better off on a conventional rim. And there are people for whom it's just not a good design because we're all different.
So, Dave, I'm curious, are you finding now, because you've been doing this for a number of years, is there a certain type of dental structure that the wedge will work much better for and really doesn't work, well? Like, for instance, I've got one friend, you may possibly know him. His teeth come to quite a point, very even right down the center, but it's quite a point there. And he feels like any pressure sort of on that point is detrimental. However, he had been playing your mouthpieces for a while and really enjoyed them. So, that thought maybe goes out the window. And then what about the flat, tooth as well?
Yeah. People have a really, people have a really irregular tooth right in the midline. The wedge can be a problem, or the wedge can be an asset because the wedge, because it is narrower and if you can shift off that point, that's a problematic point, it can be a good thing. So sometimes the wedge helps you avoid a tooth that's in the way, but sometimes people take advantage of that tooth that's in the way, and that's their pivot point, right? And if they use that pressure on that one irregular tooth, sometimes the wedge is too much pressure. They've already got a wedge in their teeth, so adding doesn't help. I think the people who don't do well are people with a smiling embouchure, because if you try to play by drawing the corners of your embouchure back in a smile, and if you use a lot of pressure, the wedge is not going to work. You have to be more of a compression pressure, more of a focused forward embouchure for it to work. But having said that, I've had customers who said that the wedge helped them to change from a smiling embouchure to a more forward focused embouchure. So it's a matter of whether you can adapt to it. I think the people that doesn't work for is really irregular teeth, and also people whose dental structure is very flat vertically. So if I turn my sideways, my hand is totally up and down. And a lot of people, their teeth cup a bit like this direction. Again, I could screen share, but your teeth usually are a little bit forward where they meet and a little bit back where they are at the roots. So from the side, it'd be this shape here. And the wedge cups over that with a similar shape. If your teeth are really flat and the wedge cups over, it's not a good fit. So I think people with a really flat vertical dental structure don't do well with the wedge. I think that's the population that I'm getting returns on, is if the top of your tooth and the bottom of your tooth are in a perfectly straight line, and your teeth line up, perfectly like that, side to side, then I think the wedge is not a good match. If your teeth have a normal, more curvature, then I think the wedge cups over that and accentuates it.
How
I'd be
about
interesting-
lips? I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm just saying, so I might be in that category of the 10%, but I'd be really interested, and Bobby, I'm sure you're going to ask about Gen 2 as well, how that's changed. But yeah, I have very straight teeth, top to bottom,
Right.
And I have one tooth that's straight out this way, and the rest, do the normal curvature like this, but one of them is like that, so I've got an edge here, and that's my pivot point. And it may be partially habit from a kid, as I was learning or trying to play higher notes, I'd go click and I'd shift over top of that. Maybe that's what it is, but be interesting to try Gen 2.
Yeah. Well, I do have some players who have a wedge. I could think of one notable player. I'm not going to name any names, but very notable player who you both know, who's been in the business a long time, plays a wedge with no lateral dip. So it's got a wedge shape. It's oval, but it doesn't have that cupped shape. And one of my endorsing artists in Vancouver, Vince Mai, plays a wedge, has the sloping shoulders at the sides, but no cup to it because he has very flat teeth. So, so I can do that as a custom order where I have no lateral dip, so it doesn't bow down, but it still has the oval shape and the sloping shoulders. So it still unloads the corners, but it doesn't have to cup over these teeth that aren't in the same shape. So that's an option that I can do as a special order. Some people it's better.
I was just thinking we're talking about dental structure, but what about labial structure? What about like people that, have you noticed anything with people that have like thin lips or big lips? People that have beady eyes? I don't know.
I have customers with really thin lips, with really full lips, and with a really prominent little peak at the front. It doesn't seem to make any difference. I've not had any obvious pattern of returns or people when I observe them or fit them. And I personally have fitted, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of players, either here at the shop or, in other venues. And dental structure seems to be what makes a difference. Lip structure, not so much.
Interesting.
So I got a question that I know people are asking because I don't have this issue at all. For me, it's a mental issue. It's not a physical issue, which is, if I try this mouthpiece, can it screw me up since it's so different? And if I go back to a regular mouthpiece, am I going to have problems or whatever? Yeah. For me, it's like I can try any mouthpiece, any kind of reasonable trumpet mouthpiece, and basically play it. But they're like shoes to me. Some feel really great right away, and some just like totally pinch my feet or whatever. And I know if I walk for 15 minutes in these shoes, my feet are going to be killing me. So this isn't for me, exactly. Kind of thing. But it doesn't ruin my feet or whatever, I guess I would say.
Yeah, it's a very good question because it's a common concern. People say, well, if I play it, will it screw up my chops? And if I play it for a year and decide to go back to regular mouthpiece, will that screw up my chops? And the answer is no. If you try a mouthpiece for a short time, a few days, a few weeks, and go back to a conventional rim, you're going to adapt very, very quickly. And I do have players who play the wedge for a couple of years. Their needs change. They go to a conventional rim and they adjust. Yeah, it might take a couple of days to kind of figure out, okay, where's baseline again, but it's not going to be anything permanent. The human body is far more adapted to that. For it to have any permanent effect any more than, I'm going to, for a couple of years, my style is high-heeled shoes. And then I'm going to say, I'm going to no longer wear high-heeled shoes. Well, are you going to be incapable of walking because of that? No, your body's going to relearn this is a different feel, and it's perfectly fine. Now, does that mean that there can't be somebody who tries and tries and tries a wedge and has chop problems? Well, of course you can, but anybody who would try a wedge, I get calls from people to say, Dave, I've been struggling with your mouthpiece for 3 months. I can't make it work. And they're desperate to make it work because they have chop problems. They have issues of some kind, and they're looking for a fix in a mouthpiece.
No, exactly. Paul and I run into this all the time, whereas 99% of problems have nothing to do with the mouthpiece. It's the way in which you play. It's your mechanics,
So,
and
if somebody's having ongoing problems and then persevere with an unsuitable mouthpiece because they're hoping it'll fix their problem, yeah, their problems might get worse, but it's not because of the mouthpiece caused the problem. It's just they have an issue they need to deal with. And a mouthpiece is not a way to fix problems. It's a tool, and that's all it is. It can help in some ways, and it can be a better tool for a lot of players, but it's not a cure for anything.
Damn it.
Sorry. Well, it might be a cure for focal dystonia for some people. I shouldn't say that. So, it can address some certain very specific problems.
That's very interesting.
So two things that it can do in many cases. One is that I've got a number of people that have focal dystonia who tried the wedge and said, you know what? I mean, there's one professional horn player, and again, I'm not going to identify where they are, but in a professional orchestra, a French horn player whose career was ending because he had focal dystonia. He tried a wedge and emailed me a year later, says, you know what, you saved my career because it's mostly gone. So there's that. I also got an email from somebody yesterday, actually, who plays in one of the military bands in the US, who has an embouchure injury. He has probably an ubiquitous oris partial tear, having lots of pain. And says, yeah, I tried my buddy's Wedge Mouthpiece. I have no pain. I can play again. And the reason is because when you get an ubiquitous oris injury, it's often at 3 o'clock. It gets at one side or the other. It's not usually midline. It's off the side a little bit where the mouthpiece and the teeth cross. And the wedge takes pressure off there. So I've had a number of players who've had ubiquitous oris injuries or other embouchure injuries who found that the wedge let them play without the pain and discomfort they had, because they're not getting, the lip is not getting crushed now between the rim and the tooth at that point. It shifted over. So you don't have the pressure at the sides. The pressure is here and here. And injuries occur here, you know, at the sides usually top lip, sometimes bottom. So those are two things where I think it can be part of a process of overcoming a specific problem, other than just, you know, range and endurance that we all have issues with to some extent.
And just to clarify that, you know, this point, you know, there's no embouchure change. You're not gonna, at least that's my experience. I'm playing the same way I always have. It just feels a little better, actually, to me, more comfortable.
There's no voluntary embouchure change, but what's remarkable, there has to be something going on, because again, I hear this from many players. They say, you know, Dave, I'm playing your mouthpiece for a month now, and it's great. But the weird thing is I went back to my old mouthpiece and I'm playing it better than I used to. So something's happened to their embouchure. Something's happened to their playing in the process of using the wedge. And I think it's that it's just made them a little more efficient in some way, maybe a more controlled closed aperture. I don't know what it is, but I hear this from people all the time. And they say, I don't like my old mouthpiece. You know, I prefer yours, but I can actually play better on my old mouthpiece than I used to be able to play. So there's some change, you know, subtle change in the approach, and there has to be, because it's a different shape and it does recruit a different set of muscles to some extent. That's probably why it works for focal dystonia, because with focal dystonia, we don't know what causes it for sure. There's something about the afferent and efferent sensory and motor circuits, the proprioception feedback loop, that gets corrupted somehow. So it causes these involuntary muscle contractions and a variety of other things. And because the wedge makes you form your embouchure slightly differently in an involuntary way, you just play. You go, I'm going to play the way I always play. But because of the shape, it does recruit a different set of fibers to some extent, and it feels different. That I think for some people with focal dystonia, it makes them find a new circuit in their brain. And that's why it can improve things. So it doesn't require a change in the embouchure. It may result in a change in your embouchure, generally in a positive way, is the reports I get from people that say, yeah, I can go back to an old mouthpiece now, and I got a half step more range than I used to have before. But people don't like it. And I always warn people, they say, well, Dave, am I going to be able to play on a wedge and my other rims? I go, absolutely. If you spend time on both, you'll be able to go back and forth. But to be honest, if the wedge works for you, the vast majority of people are going to come back for another mouthpiece. A third of our sales are repeat customers. So that tells you something, that people buy the wedge, and if they like it enough that they convert all of their mouthpieces over. Not that they have to, but they want to, because it's consistent and it works better for people that do
Yeah,
that.
I like having the same rim all the time, you know, on my face. One thing I found interesting about you is that rather than bending a mouthpiece, you've created an angled rim, which is one that I've been working with, and you can see that. And this is kind of cool. I mean, it's very, very nice, because like I have some shows that I lead, and just for aesthetic purposes, if I prefer to play out a little bit more, and I'm always kind of fighting that, and always making sure I got everything in balance, you know. But this makes it a lot less of a battle for me. And the rim that I have is only I think 5 degrees of an angle on it,
Yep.
which doesn't seem like much, but it's significant when you feel it on your face and you feel your horn there. And the other thing is just the cup volume. I didn't realize that there's a little more cup volume, obviously, on the bottom when you angle that rim out. So, I mean, I have this sort of lead mouthpiece where I can play high on. It can be bright, but yet I have the flexibility to play in the bottom area fine. Whereas a lot of times there's a much bigger compromise that I've had to make. And so it's a pretty unique and I guess idea.
For you, it sounds like the angled rim works better, but that phenomenon you're describing of having a better than expected sound in the low register is actually not a characteristic of the angled rim, it's a characteristic of the wedge. So I know you prefer, you've an angled and non-angled version. I know you prefer the angled version. That may be your airflow direction or a variety of things. But one of the things that people will say is, and I had this conversation again yesterday, says, you know, this is strange. I've got this shallow cup mouthpiece and I've got the range and endurance and the brilliance when I push it that goes along with that, but my low register sounds like a Bach 3C. It never gets that nasal quacking kazoo type sound that is so common with many shallow lead mouthpieces, that the low register is preserved. I have no idea why that is. I don't pretend to know why it is, but I do know that you can have a very shallow wedge mouthpiece like an ES cup, and the low register just sounds far more resonant than the same cup would sound on a conventional rim. So it's not that the cup depth is redistributed in the angled models because I need to preserve cup depth. And when I make those, I bend the model, and so it pulls up the cup on one side with the rim on the other side comes down. But the cup volume is preserved, and I average those out in the computer model when I do that. So the volume is the same, the distribution is different, because and the airflow is different. But people describe that same phenomenon, whether it's angled rim or not. And the angled rim is sort of an added feature that most players don't need. And I get lots of people who say, hey, Dave, do I need an angled rim? And they think the wedge is the angled rim, but it's not. The wedge is an additional thing added, or the angled rim is an additional thing added to the wedge rim. And so if people have an overbite that's causing a specific problem, I say that's the reason to get an angled rim. Otherwise, don't spend your money on something you don't need. So if you've got an overbite in your horn angle, it's causing a problem, like you can't project, or you can't read your music, or you need to fit into a line of trumpets, marching band, or some other place where you need to have the right horn angle to match, great. If you are a person who gets neck strain because you're having to crane your neck to form an embouchure, or if you're thrusting your mandible forward, getting TMJ pain because of that, then an angled rim has some use, and players will say it's a total game changer. It's very similar to bending a backbore. The difference is that the airflow is directed differently because you had a cup shape that is different. A bent backbore is a bent backbore. An angled rim, the rim is angled, the cup is changed in direction to redirect the airflow, and the backbore is unchanged. And when you bend a backbore, you change the shape of the backbore too, depending how much you're bending it. You're squashing it down. And when Chuck Finley switched to the wedge, the main reason he said he switched is because he was playing a bent Reeves backbore, and he'd been playing that for 30 years, and he tried the angled wedge and said, wow, it's just way better. He attributes that to the fact that the backbore isn't crushed in the process of bending it. He might be right. I suspect that if Chuck were to try a non-bent wedge or non-angled wedge, he'd probably find it's much the same thing. But he's convinced that it's because it's better to angle the cup and the rim than to bend the backbore and distort the flow through the backbore.
Interesting.
So, yeah.
Hey, can you tell us the difference now? You've gone. Are you Gen 2 now, or are you beyond that?
Well, they call it Gen 2. It's really Gen 3. So there was the original wedge. That's one that you tried.
Yeah.
And there were two versions of that. There was the original and the I called it the comfort or cushion rim, which had a little less lateral dip. And then I moved away from that to what was called the standard brand line. So the standard brand line was because they didn't know what the heck I was doing, and I needed to find a way to fit people with mouthpieces that were similar to theirs. So I said, well, I'll make a mouthpiece that's suitable for a person who's on a Bach 3C. I'll call it the B3C. So I scanned a Bach 3C and I built a wedge to have playing characteristics that felt and sounded like a Bach 3C, called the standard brand line. And that was fine, but it left me with a very disorganized way of describing mouthpieces, because there was a Yamaha line, there was a Bach line, there was a Schilke line, there was a Monette line, all these mishmash of sizes, and I wanted something systematic. So I took what I thought were the best features of all the various standard brand lines and took the wedge design and accentuated it. So I made the cup even more oval than it was before. I made the rim even more oval than it was before. And I changed the rim to try to appeal to a broader range of players. So the rim is designed to feel more like a conventional mouthpiece. So a standard brand mouthpiece or the original mouthpiece feels more unusual than the Gen 2, which is really the Gen 3. I called it the Gen 2, but it's really the third iteration of the wedge design. And I did that because that way people can adjust more easily and quickly and not go, oh, this feels really weird. I still have customers who started off on the original wedge or the standard brand who will not leave the original design. Mary Klazik in Victoria, head of brass studies there, started off on a wedge at Banff in 2008 on an original wedge design. She's playing the same mouthpiece. And I see Mary every year. She comes to visit. I have her try every mouthpiece I've got. She goes, no, I like the old one. So, you know, she's playing a Gen 2 of her rotary trumpet. She's doing that. But lots of players who've never moved off, and then many who have. You know, people like Mike Harriet started on original, then he went to standard brand. Now he's on a Gen 2 version of his mouthpiece. So, you know, some people progress and some don't. Again, we're all different, and we all have different needs and preferences. But the Gen 2, for most people, is going to give the best performance. For most people, it's going to have more core in the sound, more secure slotting, better range and endurance, and have less of a pressure with feeling, or less of a problem with too much pressure at 6 and 12 o'clock, because the rim is wider and the slope is a little less acute, and the lateral dip is 30 thou instead of 40 thou. So it's dialed back a little bit. Now, I shouldn't tell you this because I don't count the bag. I'm actually working on a Gen 3 because I get requests from customers who say, you know, I like the Gen 2, but I really prefer your standard brand. I really prefer your original ones. So I'm actually working on a new line of mouthpieces that will be released in the next 3 to 6 months. And I'm playing prototypes of them now, which has some Gen 2 features and some of the original features. So it'll have a 40 thou lateral dip and a more accentuated sloping shoulders. So again, it's trying to take some of the features that are, it's more of a wedge. So the best of both features. And for some players who like the wedge and go, I like the wedge, I want more wedge, it'll be a better mouthpiece. I think for most players, it won't be a better mouthpiece. I think if you're somebody who plays the wedge, you go, give me more. I want more of this. I know I like the design. What's the next step? And so it's a bit of a de-evolution back to an earlier design, keeping what's good in the Gen 2, but reintroducing some of the more extreme wedge features that were present in earlier versions of it. I'm playing on a Gen 3 now. I play better on it than on a Gen 2. But it does concentrate more pressure at 6 and 12, and that's the issue for some players.
So you also have, I think, some that are made of plastic as well. Is that right? Or
yeah, I play on a plastic mouthpiece myself. I play on an acrylic top on a brass backbore. So we make one-piece brass. We make two-piece brass. It's like a Warburton system. It's really three-piece. It's a top and a two-piece backbore. So the two-piece backbore.
I can show that here. How the shank comes off from the barrel. There's the heavy barrel here.
So we call it a two-piece. It's really a three-piece, and that lets you have either a B-flat or a C-length shank It also lets you have a gap adjusting shank, and it also lets you use a regular weight or a heavyweight upper section. So it gives you that versatility. So we have that. And then you can put on that back bore an acrylic top or a Delrin, black Delrin plastic top, or you can also get a one-piece Delrin mouthpiece. I don't make one-piece acrylics anymore. I have a few blanks sitting around, but they're too fragile. If you drop a one-piece acrylic, it'll break the end of the mouthpiece. The shank will crack about half the time. If you drop an acrylic top on a heavyweight back bore on cement, you're probably going to crack it off in threads about half the time as well. But it's not nearly as fragile as a one piece. So I own the candy store, make the candy, and I play on a plastic mouthpiece because I like the acrylic. I like the way it feels. I like the way it sounds. It gives me more grip, and I have more endurance on an acrylic mouthpiece than I do on an identical brass silver-plated mouthpiece because I'm not no energy being expended in maintaining that grip on the mouthpiece. It's there, it's passive. I have complete grip here, but mobility at the corners. So it lets me adjust my aperture, embouchure, airflow, all of those things with a minimum of energy expended. And I know it works better because I went to a rehearsal. I said, well, I'm going to go back to silver plated brass mouthpiece, enough of this plastic stuff. So I made myself mouthpiece, took it to rehearsal. I was like 2/3 of the way through and I was dying. I said, well, what's going on here? It's the same mouthpiece, but it's silver plated brass. I popped my acrylic mouthpiece back in again. Boom, I was right back. And so I like the feel of it, and I certainly have better endurance on it. When I play on a brass mouthpiece, it feels like I put a rock on my face because the acrylic, even though it's hard plastic, has a tiny, tiny bit of give. And I just find it more comfortable. And I have quite a few artists who've now converted over to acrylic because they like the feel. It's a little darker sounding. It doesn't project quite like brass does. But, if you've been subjected to any of my YouTube, Facebook, Summon the Heroes stuff, that's all an acrylic mouthpiece. That's all an acrylic top with a brass backbore. Most of it's on a C trumpet, some B flat. So, you can get all the projection that you need out of it. And I have lead players playing on acrylic tops. So,
well, part of what I don't like about brass is just the fact that it gets cold, a metal mouthpiece. And it just seems, I never thought about the grip. I've never played one, but it just seems that it would be a little warmer on your face or maybe warm up faster.
Yeah, it feels warmer on your face. And I find that Delrin has too much grip. Acrylic for me is a sweet spot, but Delrin and acrylic both feel warm. Plastic mouthpieces change temperature the same way that brass does. The difference is they don't conduct thermal energy the same way. So if you have a brass mouthpiece at room temperature and a plastic mouthpiece at room temperature, when you put the brass mouthpiece on your face, it feels cold because the metal is conducting heat away from your chops. The plastic mouthpiece is the same temperature, but it's not a good conductor. So you put it on your face and it doesn't feel cold. It's what you feel, what you perceive as cold is heat being conducted away from your body. So they always feel warm. And so they're great for playing outdoors. They won't freeze to your chops the way a brass mouthpiece will. They don't feel uncomfortable. And they're great for clinicians who have their horn on a stand and giving a clinic and got to pick up their horn and play it, and they haven't picked it up in 10 minutes, and the mouthpiece feels warm in their chops. So you never get that shock of a cold mouthpiece. So they're nice that way. And then Delrin's great because it's indestructible, and you can run a Delrin mouthpiece over with a truck and not hurt it. So, and they're cheaper. So, you can throw a Delrin in your glove compartment of your car and have a practice mouthpiece there, or a backup mouthpiece for when you forget your mouthpiece at a gig. They're good for practice. They're also very good for playing in a subdued environment. If you want to play let's say you're playing in a small club, when we get back to that, and you got, tables of people sitting 10 feet from you, and people are covering their ears because, oh, you guys are so loud. Pop in a Delrin mouthpiece and it takes all the edge off that sound. And it's like you dialed everything back 20%. You don't have to hold back. You can still give it, but the mouthpiece doesn't project and never gets that objectionable bright sound. So it's really sweet that way. It's also good in church. If you're playing with a worship group and you keep hearing, oh, Dave, can you put a mute in your mouthpiece? You pop an acrylic, or a mute in your horn. Put an acrylic or Delrin mouthpiece in your horn, and it settles it down so you're not getting the choir master say, hey, Dave, you're too loud. Or better yet, my secret weapon actually is I put a flugelhorn top on a trumpet adapter shank and pop that on my C trumpet. And for playing in church, there's nothing that beats that, because you sound like a very sweet C flugelhorn that plays in tune. Strange machine, but I call it instant flugelhorn. Just add water. I have like a couple flugels. I never play them because if I want that sound, I put a flugelhorn top on a trumpet shank, pop it in the horn, and the horn's in tune, it's warm, and it sounds about halfway to a flugelhorn. And if it's an acrylic or Delrin top, it's that much darker. So plastic has its place for some applications.
So we were talking about marching band and all that stuff. I remember when I was a kid, I was in marching band, I was in drum corps, and I was one of these guys that had braces for a while. So does this wedge affect people that have braces? Because I know there's a lot of kids I see that have issues with this.
I mean, the wedge is great for braces. If you go to the Wedge website and go through the reviews and stuff, you'll see people who said, you saved my kids playing with braces. The wedge, because it cups over, so here's your teeth here's the shape of your teeth, front. The wedge cups over that. So now you've got this steel band across here that are your braces, and the wedge cups over that. So it takes the pressure off that steel, because ordinarily your mouthpiece sits like this and it's crushing, but the wedge cups over that steel band. So kids with braces feel way more comfortable with a wedge mouthpiece for the most part. I think I can think of one time in the last year when I ever got a mouthpiece back when somebody bought one because they had braces. So most players feel more comfortable going up one size. So if a kid's on a rim that's a 0.67 inch rim, put them on a 0.665 or 0.67 and go up one size and give them a wedge mouthpiece, and they'll feel better and they'll sound better instantly. They go, I'm not back where I was necessarily, but I'm way better than I was. And again, not everybody's going to experience that, but the vast majority of kids, I mean, I've done this again at trade shows where I kick them up with braces. When did you get those? Oh, 2 weeks ago, play a note for me. He just sounds like he's a beginner. Been playing for 3 years. You stick a wedge mouthpiece in his horn, he goes, wow, I sound like I used to. So for some people, it can make a huge difference. And whether it's trumpet, trombone, I mean, the low brass does the same thing. So yeah, if you have a kid and they have braces, just try them on a wedge. If it doesn't work, send it back to me. I mean, you got 90 days to figure out if it works, and they'll know in 10 minutes if they're actually better on a wedge than not. And get a plastic mouthpiece. If a kid has braces, put them on an acrylic or Delrin top on a brass backbore, because now you've got the plastic with a little bit of give and the wedge rim way more comfortable than a brass mouthpiece. And if you put a plastic top on a brass backbore, you get about 50% of the sound back. The problem with a plastic mouthpiece is it lacks core in the sound, it lacks slotting, it lacks projection, and the feedback is different. So like a one-piece Delrin mouthpiece sounds okay, but the notes just don't feel solid when you play it. They don't sound solid. But if you put an acrylic or Delrin top on a heavyweight brass backbore, you've added the mass back to the mouthpiece. So now your feedback feels more like a brass mouthpiece, and the sound has the core and the density that you have. A little darker than brass, but that's not necessarily a problem for a kid with braces, because then he can maybe go one cup size shallower, titch shallower, not get a brighter sound, not working as hard with their braces. So yeah, acrylic or Delrin top on a brass backbore for a kid with braces. For some of them, it's like, wow, I'm happy again. And they can stay on it after the braces. They can go back to conventional rim if they want to.
Well, that's great. This is, I know we're running out of time here, but this has been like really, I mean, I knew a little bit about them. And of course, I've been drinking the Kool-Aid here, as they say. And for me, and I say this from the bottom of my heart, I mean, it really has been something that has surpassed what I thought it was going to be. I frankly was just thinking, whatever, let's try another one and see what happens. And fortunately, I had a really great experience. So for people here in our group, what's the next step if they want to try one? What do they got to do?
Well, if they want to try it, we have a 90-day money back guarantee and a lifetime trade-in program. So they get 90 days to try it. And then a year down the road and say, I need a different size. You can trade it back in and get 80% what you paid for it towards a new mouthpiece. But what we'll also do for this is if anybody watches this recording, we'll give you a 10% discount coupon, and they can just go on the website and plug in the 10% discount coupon that you'll provide them on.
Awesome.
On the
Yeah, we'll
form.
put that down in the description.
Yeah,
for sure.
And they'll get a 10% discount off their mouthpiece. And then, if they buy one, what we do for repeat customers, if they put a review in the store, they get another 10% discount for mouthpieces down the road. So we do that because we know it's a big investment. It doesn't cost. It costs less than some. It's less than a GR, less than a Monette, less than a custom Shilkey. But it's more than a Bach, more than a standard Shilkey, and more than a lot of other mouthpieces. It's an investment. Like one piece is $210 US with free shipping, so they're not cheap. And for students, it's a lot of money. Or for people, these are hard times. People haven't necessarily got that kind of cash to throw around these days because people are hurting. So, the 10% coupon will help a bit. And then if people want to buy more than one, they get the discount down the road. And then if it needs change, they can trade it in. And we do that for students who might be on a 3C and they go to college and the prof says, well, you got to be on a 1.5 now. And so they can trade it in on a new mouthpiece, stay with the Wedge, and not have to fork out a whole bunch of money for a new mouthpiece.
That's cool. That sounds like a great program. Well, Dr. Dave, thank you so much for spending a little bit of time with us and enlightening us. And Paul, I think when Generation 3 comes out, we're going to have to bring him back, and we'll see what some of the differences are and have a little chat about that.
Definitely. I was going to ask you, so if I were to come to you, how would we start out? But that's for our next session then.
Yeah. What I do is I ask people, what mouthpiece do you play now? What kind of music do you play? And what do you want to get out of a mouthpiece that you're not getting from the mouthpiece you have now? Because any change needs to be made for a reason. Just randomly going on a safari for mouthpiece is not what I recommend. You have an idea, okay, this is what I want to accomplish with a change. And then we can say, okay, this is what's going to work for you. And sometimes it's just everything's working great. I just want to know if I can tune it up a little bit. And then we choose something that's comparable to what you're on now. So I just spend a lot of time with people on the phone, email, and Zoom chats, and we figure out what they need. And then we send it out and they try it, and then we talk again.
Very cool. Well, thanks for being with us. This really enlightening, and I learned so much more about it than I thought I might have known.
Great.
All right. Well, thanks again, and we'll catch you on the next one. And thanks for being part of the group and chiming in when you're there. And you guys can. Is it okay if people ask you questions in the group here about these?
Yeah.
Okay.
I tend to not butt into things too much. If somebody's talking about the Wedge, I kind of stay out of it unless somebody says, "Hey, maybe Dr. Dave can chime in," because I don't want to be there promoting my product. That's not why I'm part of the group. But I'm always happy to answer questions about it. In the group or by email or whatever, but I chime in on things incognito. I don't say, hey, it's Dr. Dave of the Wedge. I'm kind of there as my personal persona, but I'm always happy to answer questions.
Great.
Well, that's great. Well, we appreciate it, and we'll look forward to seeing you again real soon. Thank you, Dave.
Thanks for having me.
Yep.
Yeah, be safe.
Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.